I recently had the opportunity to visit with one of our senior-most members here at the church because she's approaching her 98th birthday. And anytime you get that high in age and number, it gives a good opportunity to do some reflection, talk a little bit about life and where things are headed, because after all, when you get to your 90s, you can be pretty sure you've lived more of your life behind you than instead of what's ahead of you. I'm often surprised and find a little bit of humor in death announcements that often say something like, so-and-so died suddenly at 97 years old. Like, okay. So we had a chance to visit, and I got to talk to her a little bit about her life and how the world changed, and I asked her questions like, what's been the most surprising thing about your life? And she shared with me some things there, and then I asked her the question, so, as you approach 98, how do you feel about the fact that you may die soon? And her answer was incredible and so surprising. She told me the story of a friend that she has, and she was recently talking to this friend, and this friend didn't have a real church connection or a faith life, and the friend was telling her that she deeply admired her for the way she's lived her life, how no matter what she faced, she seemed to have this poise and this calmness, and she was sad that she didn't have the same thing. And that conversation was bittersweet for us. We rejoiced in the fact that we shared this hope, this comfort that we have because we know Jesus, but we were also saddened and lamented the fact that her friend, who she cared for so much, didn't have that same feeling, didn't have that same assurance. We gather here today in the basis and the foundation of who we are as God's people. Easter is what it's all about. And when we gather here with the women at the empty tomb, we find that calming force that we need as we live in this world that is so often filled with death. Now, as I go around, it's often asked of me as a pastor what exactly I do, what my life's really all about. I think people sometimes are surprised to find out that this is my full-time job. I think sometimes people think that I get to play church on Sunday and then the rest of the week I go back to a real job. So when I'm kind of feeling impish and a little bit provocative, I'll answer the question by saying that my job is to get people ready to die. And at first they'll look at me like with a little bit of confusion. Then it'll turn to indignation. And then after a little while, the light bulb kind of goes off in their head. Because if you want to boil down and be really simplistic about what I do, I get people ready to die. If there was no sin, there would be no death. If there was no death, there would be no reason for us to hear the good news of the gospel, and there would especially be no reason for us to come here today and celebrate the new life of Easter morning. But the reality is that there is death, and we do die, and we need to be prepared for it. And so that's what I do. But I think the fact that my answer makes people so uncomfortable points out the fact that we are not comfortable talking about this topic of death. And naturally so, because we are creatures of a living God who wants us to live. Our natural inclination and everything about us is to live and to fight for life. We want to live each day. We want to live it to the fullest, and that's great. Death is an unnatural, unwelcome, rude interruption to life. But it is our reality, no matter what we think, even though we may not want to talk about it or be comfortable with it. And in the face of death, it is this gift that we have here, what Easter is all about, that gives us the only answer, the only hope, and the only assurance that we need as we face those unexpected times when we got caught, shocked, and surprised when death rudely interferes with our life. Now, after Christmas Eve, when I shared that personal story about my son and some of my other favorite things like Billy Joel, I got some feedback from some people that said to me they were surprised that I wasn't somehow able to work Star Wars into my Christmas Eve sermon. So for those of you who were disappointed on Christmas, rest assured you're not going to go home disappointed today. A couple weeks ago, the latest Star Wars movie, Rogue One, was released on DVD. Now, since that time that movie came out a few months ago, right before Christmas, there's been a lot of talk and publicity surrounding the fact that one of the main characters in the movie wasn't a real actor, but was a computer-generated facsimile of the actor. Grand Moff Tarkin was the second big bad guy in the original Star Wars 40 years ago, next to Darth Vader. And so because Rogue One leads us into the original Star Wars, Grand Moff Tarkin was brought back to play a role now. But the problem is that Peter Cushing, the actor who portrayed Grand Moff Tarkin, died in 1994. So how would they do this? Well, Lucasfilm took a whole bunch of his old movies with his face and his voice and his image, they loaded it into a computer, and then by some special effects and magic, they were able to project Peter Cushing's face, Grand Moff Tarkin, over an actor who stood in his place, and he appeared in the movie. Now, since this, there's been a little bit of controversy about the ethics and the morality of this and whether or not it was right. And especially given the fact that Carrie Fisher, and for those of you who have somehow avoided Star Wars for 40 years, Carrie Fisher was Princess Leia, and she died at the end of last year. And there's a real fear among people that they're going to do the same thing with her and bring her back in future movies as this computer-generated special effect. So it got me to thinking, like, what's the controversy about? What are people upset about? I mean, after all, I'm pretty sure that Peter Cushing's estate okayed the use of his image, and I'm pretty sure they benefited from the use of his image also. So what's the problem? What are people upset about? And then it hit me. The digital resurrection of Peter Cushing and Grand Moff Tarkin brings to mind the uncomfortable subject of death, of life after death. People think it's over. It's done. And when we're confronted with an image of somebody we know to be gone already, it evokes in us those emotions, those questions that have to do with faith and spirituality and life after death. And as we know, that's not a topic that's easy to talk about in our world today. And so there we have it. It's a struggle. It brings about those things we don't want to discuss and talk about. For me personally, I had no problem with the digital resurrection of Grand Moff Tarkin. Because after all, this is really what my life and my work is all about. Life after death. But the thing for me is I don't merely just expect it as some sort of movie magic. I'm looking for it really actually happening one day. That's what Easter's all about. That's why we're here. And gathering over and over again in these gifts of Easter are all about you and I meeting the risen, resurrected Christ and it changing our perspective, changing the way we look at life, changing the way we think about life. That's exactly what Paul was getting at in our second reading today, when he talked about how after we know that Christ is risen from the dead, it helps us to set our mind on the things that are above. It does change the way we live. It gives us a calming force to face the struggles and the unexpected tragedies that surround us and come upon us in life. And it changes us in the way we can live our lives. And our first reading from Acts. And during the season of Easter, the Old Testament lesson is replaced by readings from Acts to tell us what happened with the apostles and the church after Jesus rose from the dead. And in today's reading, we hear from Peter. Now remember Peter before Good Friday and the cross. Peter was that cowardly denier of Jesus who couldn't run fast enough when people questioned whether or not he knew Jesus. Now, here we have him after Jesus rises from the dead, and we hear he's standing up in front of a bunch of people who can put him to death, put him in prison, and he's boldly telling them why the resurrection of Jesus is so important and why it makes a difference in the world. That's our power too. That when we meet the resurrected Jesus, when we gather here in these gifts, what we sing and call the Feast of Victory, it changes our hearts, it changes our lives, it changes the way we look at things and how we act. And so that unexpected tragedy of death, it doesn't have the same effect. We set our mind on the things that are above. And in the face of death, we always look for the hope of the resurrection, not some idealistic wishful thinking, not some Hollywood magic, but the resurrection is our reality. It is our assurance, and it is our confidence, always. Amen.